We've all spent some amount of time in Varrock, probably lots of time, banking here, trading here, starting quests here, running through on our way to somewhere else. It's one of those places that feels so familiar that you almost stop seeing it. Not because it's boring, because it's useful. Varrock is a place that players use. But one day I wondered, what happens if you stop treating Varrock like a collection of useful game mechanics and start treating it like somewhere that people actually have to live? A home. Then I found this. The Varrock Census. An actual document just sitting in the Palace Library. It lists all of the residents of Varrock, their names, their professions. I mean, isn't that pretty cool? I mean, just look at this. Teacher, shopkeeper, guard, farmer, baby. Baby? Apparently that's a profession. Mugger. That's worse, because if Mugger is being officially recognized by the Varrock government as a profession, then the city's either admirably transparent or in much worse shape than I thought. And the more I read, the stranger it becomes. According to this census, the city has 2 teachers, 2 students, 2 farmers. For the capital, feels ambitious to feed an entire nation with just 2 people producing food. Now, to be fair, this census is a little old. It was made in the year 160 of the 5th age. For those unaware, it's currently the year 169 of the 5th age. Nice. So maybe a lot has changed. Maybe the city's improved. Maybe the Mugger reformed. Maybe the baby got a promotion. But the census made me curious to ask a question that the game trains us to never ask. What is life actually like for the people of Varrock? The citizens. The people who stick around when we log out. So today, I'm conducting the first livability survey of Varrock in almost a decade. And I want to answer one question. Could anyone actually live here? So the Northeast Gate, very official, very secure, walls, outposts, guards, honestly not bad. A city can have all the fountains and culture that it wants, but if goblins could just wander in and start redecorating, that's a problem. Here's a house that I can't say I've actually ever been inside of. It's a nice place. Comfortable furniture, spacious, direct access to the city walls for some reason, and a lovely view of the royal gardens, which might be a bit of a privacy concern for the Queen, but I'm sure Bob here has no ill intent. Bob, how's it going? Right. Doesn't really want to talk, which is fair. I mean, if a stranger came into my house with a clipboard and started assessing the furniture, I'd probably become immediately busy as well. But if I'm not mistaken, Bob isn't on the census. Which is strange, because Bob definitely exists, I think. Probably just an administrative oversight. Or maybe Bob moved in the last 9 years, who can say? Either way, it's clear that what we're doing here is important, and I'm sure King Rold will be grateful. The church. One of the oldest and most historical buildings in any settlement. If anywhere can give me an idea of the foundations of this city, I'm sure this is the place. Priest, pews, candles, a man with a very recognizable name, who looks like he's had a long day. Not sure why he wouldn't choose to take a nap at home, but hey, I can't judge a man for taking a rest. And upstairs, we got Elsie, who is a retired resident. That's usually a good sign. People generally have to live long enough to be able to retire. She's got a few apples and a banana. I'm no dietitian, but I might suggest a little more protein, Elsie. 1 bed. I'm not sure what the dynamic is between Father Lawrence and Elsie, but for the purpose of the investigation, I'm going to assume that 1 bed is enough. The church gave Varrock something important. A little bit of normal life. A priest, a retired woman, a warm building, a few bits of food. It made the city feel lived in. Just over the road, we've got the estate agent, which is perfect. If I'm trying to figure out if anyone could actually live in Varrock, getting an idea of the housing market is going to be pretty important. So Marlowe here works for the estate agent, but he's asking for help fixing his dad's house. Perfectly normal request. The problem is it's not actually his dad's house. According to Marlowe, his father found it and nobody was using it, so he settled in. And Marlowe wants the repairs to be kept off the record because technically he's not supposed to be there. And when you ask why his dad is staying there, Marlowe explains that an economic downturn wiped out his father's pension. And what's more concerning is Marlowe says It happens more often than you'd think. That's a strange sentence to hear this early in the investigation. And the estate agent himself isn't much more reassuring. He tells me that houses exist in folded space. Now that's a level of wizardry that I'm going to choose to ignore today. I mean, he does technically sell houses, they might just be in some other dimension. But the skill guide here refers to them as player-owned houses. Player-owned houses. Everyone that we've met so far today is an NPC, a non-player character. Can none of these people buy houses? That feels like a fairly large flaw for a housing market. The survey's starting to feel a little less like a checklist and more like a warning sign. I mean, Bob was fine, the church was fine, the gate was fine, but Marlowe's trying to secretly repair a house that his father wasn't supposed to be living in, and if Marlowe's telling the truth, it's not an isolated tragedy. Now this, I like. The museum. A city that documents its past is usually at least pretending to care about its future, and it's a huge building. Clean floors, displays everywhere, and this guy tells me that they just received funding for a new dig, so clearly they're investing here. The survey did only list 2 students and 2 teachers, but I mean, I'm counting significantly more than that. They're on a school trip. That makes sense. That's a great sign for education. I didn't know if we were going to really see any evidence of education in Varrock, but I mean, this is a gold star. One of the students is asking to go to the toilet, which firstly, valid. As someone with the bladder of a 90-year-old man, I can relate. But secondly, where? I mean, as of yet, I haven't seen a single toilet, a hole in the ground, or conveniently placed bucket. I mean, to be fair, Varrock does have sewers, actual underground infrastructure, real civic planning, a whole system beneath the city for things to go. Then I'm going to make the executive decision not to investigate too closely, and genuine credit where it's due. The existence of a sewer alone at least tells me that somebody thought about how a city should function. The developers remembered that a city needs somewhere for waste to go. They also remembered that children might ask for the toilet. It just seems like they forgot the part in the middle. So far, Varrock was doing alright. Strange, yes, a little inconsistent, definitely missing an important part between student and sewer, but still recognizable as a functioning capital city. The east side has a bank, because of course it does. If RuneScape's taught me anything, it's that civilization exists within a 10-tile radius of any banker. As I headed south, changes started to emerge. There was no sign saying welcome to the bad part of Varrock. It was more subtle than that, but the buildings looked more tired, the streets looked less maintained, certainly nowhere near as polished as things that I'd seen so far. But every city has its rougher areas, you know, the kind of place you don't want to get lost late at night. Thankfully for RuneScape citizens, night doesn't really seem to exist, which is definitely a topic for another video. And then in the middle of this very normal city inspection, I found this ladder. Right. An underground gambling ring. For cats. More specifically, people are betting on which cat can kill a certain number of rats the fastest. And one of the gamblers mentions that cats very often die doing this. I'm not entirely sure if this is legal, but I'm almost certain it shouldn't be. It's okay, I won't let them get you. A few minutes earlier, I was in a museum full of wonder, and just a few steps down the road, I'm stood in the middle of an underground rat death match. It's not necessarily the collapse of civilization, but it does suggest that Varrock might be leaving some attractions out of the tourist leaflet. A little further on, another home. When I tried to speak to Guido, Julie's husband, she said her husband was very sick and she didn't want anyone bothering him. Totally fair. When I asked if there was anything I could do, she said no, and she was just waiting for him to see the priest. That's actually quite sad. A few minutes ago, the church felt like a reassuring part of the city. Now it feels like it's doing a job it was never supposed to do. Julie didn't ask for medicine. She didn't mention a doctor or a hospital. She just wants him to see the priest. That might be comforting, but it's not exactly what I had in mind when I thought about healthcare in a capital city. And the further south I go, the harder it is to try and treat this as just a rough patch. There's damaged houses, empty rooms, and alleyways that look like they haven't seen a maintenance budget since the 4th Age. And there he is, the mugger, listed in the census as a profession. I guess after 9 years he's settled in and his chosen career path, but in the census it felt like a joke. like a goofy line. Down here, it feels a lot more literal. This is the Zamorakian Chapel, which back in the church, Elsie described as the evil temple, which isn't ideal branding, I'll be honest. And over here is the Black Arm Gang, a criminal organization. Not hidden deep in a cave or on some private island, just right here, in the city walls. Honestly, this was starting to feel a lot less like Whiterun and a lot more like Riften. And the strange part is, none of this is hidden particularly well. The mugger, the evil temple, the rival gang, the abandoned houses. It isn't invisible, it's just part of the city. And this is Marlowe's dad's house, the guy we were talking to in the estate agent, Old Man Yarlow. I say his house, it's the place he's choosing to live. Broken furniture, a sleeping bag, a place that somebody's living because apparently the alternative was worse. This doesn't just feel like a quirky quest setup anymore. It's an old man whose pension was wiped out, son works for an estate agent, but still ended up quietly squatting in a home he doesn't own. That's bleak. And the most uncomfortable part is how small the quest makes it feel. Rip out some broken furniture, build him better stuff, get paid under the table, and move on. Except the actual problem is much bigger than a bed or a chair. Marlowe says this happens more often than you think, which means somewhere under the surface of this bright, famous capital city, there's more people just like Yarlow. People who used to be doing well, successful, people who lost everything, people who only become visible when the player's given a job to do. Marlowe did say there was an economic downturn. Maybe the city isn't ignoring these problems. Maybe it just can't afford to fix them. There's a cabbage patch, which is our first sign of actual food production, which is great. Although this does look more like somebody's private allotment rather than large-scale agriculture, but I'm in no position to be picky at this point. The Blue Moon Inn. Looks like a proper city pub. I wonder if they're going to be showing the World Cup final. There's a barbarian who I'm going to assume is visiting from outside of the city and not part of the census. Dr. Harlow, who appears to be having a very professional afternoon. Definitely some sanitary concerns here, but I can't judge a man for enjoying a pint or 10. Finally, a cook. What are we serving today, good sir? Cabbage. Just a cabbage. Not even a shop interface, just a line of dialogue asking me to buy a raw cabbage. Hang on, there's literally a cabbage allotment. Right outside. I mean, it's right there. Now, I'm not accusing anybody of cabbage theft. I'm just saying the evidence is somewhat inconvenient for our cook here. Now, on its own, a cook selling a stolen cabbage is a good RuneScape joke. But in this version of Varrock, it also says something else. Food exists in flashes, a few pieces of fruit in a church, a cook selling a cabbage. But just like housing and healthcare, it feels oddly inadequate. A little further on, there are tramps, which I'm going to assume is what Jagex lovingly calls homeless people, and of course Charlie being one of them. At least he's been given the dignity of a name. Charlie's one of those NPCs that players have probably walked past hundreds of times without ever really thinking about him. He's just part of Varrock. Set dressing. A man locked to a few small tiles of the city, permanently homeless, permanently ignored. But moving on from Charlie, at the southern gate, more guards, more walls. Still secure, still impressive. But what's this? About 10 feet outside the gate. Dark wizards. Loads of them. And it doesn't look like they just moved in yesterday. I mean, this poor attempt at a Stonehenge replica looks like it's been here for years. Should someone be doing something? I mean, this definitely isn't a good look for the tourism industry. Which raises a fairly obvious question, why isn't somebody doing something? But looking at it, I mean, look how many dark wizards there are. And look how many guards there are. It does look a lot less like negligence and more like a numbers problem. Either way, King Rold will be hearing about this. So to be fair, Marlowe did suggest that the city might have a money problem. The southern gate seems to suggest they have a manpower problem. Maybe this is just what an overwhelmed city looks like. A city that's grown too large, too complicated, too busy to deal with everything that's happening inside the city walls. Right, general store. The 7-Eleven of RuneScape. If ordinary people buy their essentials anywhere, surely it's here. Pot, bucket, jug, bowl, cake tin? No food. Not even bread. None on the shelves either. Just an impressive selection of receptacles for food, which is useful for people who have food, which from what I've seen today, nobody does. Now, I don't want to spend the whole video litigating Varrock's food supply, because the point isn't if a medieval fantasy world has a fully modeled agricultural economy, but just an indication or a sign that somebody ate something recently would be nice. The marketplace looks better. It's much prettier and colorful than the streets I just came out of. Although I say it looks better, a stall selling cosmetics to players who completed quests quickly, a stall selling cosmetics to players who completed a limited time game mode, a stall selling fur, and a guy selling newspaper. It's not exactly the heart of the economic industry that maybe I thought this might be. There are other shops though. We got a sword shop and an armor shop, an archery shop. We got a hairdresser and a clothes shop. I mean, if you're looking to go into battle with some fresh drip and a sick fade, then hey, Varrock's got you covered. On this side of town, we've also got the apothecary, which is healthcare. Sort of. I mean, apothecaries were actually important parts of medieval cities, so I will give Varrock a genuine point here. He can make potions, he understands ingredients, so he seems useful. His list of potions do feel a lot more like supplements rather than first aid. He also requires you to get the ingredients yourself, which might not be ideal if you're against the clock of poison damage. So for healthcare, we have one man selling vaguely useful potions. We have a doctor in a pub who seems more concerned about where his next pint's coming from than his next patient. And we have a sick man whose wife is waiting for a religious miracle. It's not exactly what I had in mind. But let's check out the newspaper stand that we saw earlier. Maybe the city's working on some of the shortcomings that we've identified so far. The Varrock Herald. The Herald says that Varrock received a complete makeover. King Rold explains that the goal is to keep visitors coming to see the beautiful sights of the famous capital city, and specifically points people towards the newly refurbished museum. And from the right angle, Varrock really does look beautiful. The Herald isn't lying exactly. It does have a version of itself that's clean and safe and busy and easy to sell to visitors. But that version does leave a lot out. There's no mention of the rat pits, or a housing crisis, no Charlie, no tramps, no sick man waiting for a priest. It talks about visitors. It talks about sights. It talks about how beautiful the capital city looks. And the obituaries are a strange inclusion. Goblin died, giant rat died, unicorn died, several Varrock guards died, bear died. The bear gets more formal acknowledgement in the local media than any of the struggling citizens that I met today. The Herald made everything I'd seen today so much harder to explain away. Earlier, I was questioning if Varrock was in financial ruin, unequipped to deal with the hardships of daily life. But bankrupt cities don't usually have beautification projects. They don't renovate museums to attract visitors. They don't maintain markets and newspapers about how lovely everything looks. The economic downturn explanation had made sense in southern Varrock, but now it was starting to feel a lot more like an excuse. If the city had money for makeovers and museums, and money to keep visitors impressed, then maybe Varrock wasn't failing because it had no resources. Maybe the resources were just going somewhere else. So if Varrock really does have money, then where's it all coming from? I think I might have an idea. This is the Grand Exchange. Think of this like the stock market and Amazon, smashed together and placed inside of a fantasy medieval world. Food, armor, weapons, anything you can imagine is bought and sold right here. If money's moving through Gielinor, there's a very good chance it's passing through the Grand Exchange. Travelers from all across the world come here to try and make their millions. And look at this. Every transaction is taxed, 2%. 2% doesn't sound like much until you remember that this is the heart of the economy in RuneScape. It adds up fast. And that changes the question completely. Because if even a fraction of that tax is flowing into Varrock, this isn't a question of whether this city has funds, it's proof that it does. This was no longer a question about whether Varrock could afford to care about its citizens. It was a question of whether Varrock had decided to. The last stop on this roller coaster of an investigation, the place every capital eventually points you towards, the seat of power, the palace. And credit where credit's due. I mean, this place is stunning. gardens, groundkeepers, rare plants, clean paths, a bear. I don't know what constitutional role this bear performs, but he certainly has a better claim to housing than Marlowe's dad. This place is extremely well maintained. Very strong guard presence as well. I mean, this has to be one of the safest places in the city. Inside, there's kitchens, a dining room, a library, and enough space to make the average Varrock resident's house feel like a storage closet. And for a moment, I understood why Varrock works so well. Because if this is the version of the city you see, it's beautiful. The polished streets, the public image, the sense that this is a capital worth visiting. This is the capital King Rold wants you to remember. And on the roof, guards in training. Loads of them. Apparently, the average life expectancy of a Varrock guard is about 30 seconds, which suddenly explains the recruitment drive. But the roof changed how I saw the southern gate earlier. I tried to make excuses for the city. Maybe the guards outside the gate were outnumbered because they lacked manpower. But standing on the palace roof, surrounded by guards in training, that explanation started to fall apart. Varrock has manpower. It definitely has money. And that's when I was reminded of what really mattered here. As I stood on the palace roof, I took a look back over the city, and my eyes were immediately drawn back to the south of Varrock. For a moment, the palace had pulled me in. The clean floors, the garden, the scale of it. This was the version of Varrock that the city wanted me to believe in. But all it took was one glance back to the south, and I wasn't thinking about the palace anymore. I was thinking about Old Man Yarlow. About the cold, bare floor of a house that he wasn't supposed to be living in. About Charlie wandering the streets that the newspaper didn't mention. About Julie waiting for a priest to see her dying husband. About the guards at the gate, the dark wizards right outside it, and the underground rat pits. The palace wasn't interesting because kings live in palaces, that's just the arrangement. It was interesting because of what the palace proved. Varrock knows how to maintain a version of itself that it wants people to see. It can make the capital look safe, wealthy, important, which makes the parts that it doesn't maintain so much harder to excuse. When I started this investigation, I thought I was going to score Varrock like a city inspector. Food, water, housing, healthcare, defense, economy. A silly checklist for a silly question. Could anyone actually live here? And for a while that made sense. Varrock has the surface level ingredients of a functioning city. It has shops, civic buildings, infrastructure, guards, and a big enough ego to publish a newspaper about its own makeover. But the longer I wandered around, the less useful the checklist became. Because the real story of Varrock isn't about if the city has enough buildings, it's about who those buildings are for. The city's priorities are clearest in the parts that face outwards. The version visitors see. The version traders use. The version players remember. That's the Varrock that the newspaper's selling. But if you actually live here, the city looks a lot different. If you're Old Man Yarlow, you've lost your pension, retreated into a home that isn't yours, and rely on your son for secret repairs because the housing market isn't for you. There's barely any food in sight. The nearest pub just sells a cabbage that at this point I'm convinced is stolen. If you get sick, your best option's the priest. There's a mugger patrolling your street. Gang members are your neighbors. An evil temple across the road. And if you go for a walk outside the city, dark wizards are waiting to earth blast you. That's not a bad day. That's just your life. And when that's your reality, it becomes a little easier to understand how someone ends up being listed on the census as a mugger. That's what makes Varrock so strange. It's not abandoned, it isn't poor, it isn't even badly designed, at least not for us. For players, Varrock is brilliant. You can bank, trade, resupply, start quests, sell loot, and then head back out into the world. A place that feels alive just long enough for you to decide where to go next. But after spending a day looking at the people who actually live here, it became a lot harder to ignore them. But we can't rebuild South Varrock. We can't make the newspaper report on the rat pits. We can't stop the dark wizards from attacking travelers outside the gate. And we can't convince King Rold to spend a little less on city walls and a little more on the people inside them. But next time you're in Varrock, maybe take that contract to go and fix Marlowe's dad's house. Give Charlie a coin. Pet the stray dog. Because if you don't, King Rold certainly isn't going to. So, could anyone actually live here? Yes, but only if the city decides that you matter. Thanks for watching.